Today, I'm going to show you how to add a pattern or texture to clothing in Photoshop. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning Photoshop and photography fun. And today's episode is going to be so much fun. We're going to take an existing pattern or texture and warp it, transform it, and scale it to actually fit onto a piece of clothing. It's going to be an awesome episode. We're also going to show you how to take the highlights and the shadows from the existing garment and apply them over top of the texture to make it look like it's actually a part of the original fabric. You can use these techniques to create some swatches for an online store or test out your designs on clothing. It's going to be an awesome episode, guys. Let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. All right, guys, jumping into Photoshop, we've got our image of our subject and we've got our pattern. So the first thing I need to do is get my pattern over here to this document. We're going to use our move tool. So let's click on our move tool here. I'm going to hold shift and we're going to click and drag from one document to another. There we go. Let's go ahead and convert our colors, hit OK, and there we go. We've got our new pattern here on this image. So let's hit F for full screen and go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Now in this case, my subject's shirt in the background is really light in color and this fabric is really dark. So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to invert my fabric to make it a little bit lighter. It's going to make whatever is dark, light, and vice versa. So let's go ahead and hit Control Command I. There we go, inverting our fabric, and I like this too. I think it looks really cool. So that's an additional step. You guys obviously don't need to invert your fabric if not necessary, but if you do want to switch colors really quickly, Control Command I is a great keyboard shortcut. Now let's go ahead and scale our fabric onto our subject. So I'm going to bring our opacity down just a little bit. We're going to hit Control Command T for the transform, and let's go ahead and rotate this around. There we go. We're going to put it right over top of our subject, and I'm just going to scale this down just a little bit. Now, the real key here, we actually want our fabric to be a bit larger than our destination. So don't scale it down to something like that. You want to make sure it's a little bit larger. Now, in this case, I do want this print to be pretty large, so that's totally okay. Now, let's go ahead and show you guys. I'm going to duplicate this layer. Let's say you wanted your print to just be a little bit smaller. Let's say like that was the size you actually wanted your print. Well, in this case, what you can do is you can find duplicate areas. You can see that this flower is the exact same as that flower, right? So if you wanted to duplicate this pattern and have it basically stretch across a larger area, simply duplicate your layer by hitting Control or Command J. There we go. And you can use a lowered opacity and just click and drag, there we go, until you can line up, all right, there we go, until you can line up multiple fabric swatches. And in this case, we can line those up and then we can see we can repeat this pattern over and over again. So if you have a smaller pattern you want to repeat, this is a great way to do it. Just go ahead and line them up. Okay, now in this case, what we want to do, we're going to be using this original texture here. So let's go ahead and bring it back up to 100%. Okay, and then I'm going to put a layer mask on this layer. So let's go ahead and put a layer mask on there, and I'm going to hit Control or Command I to invert that layer, making it completely black. In this example, we want to make sure that the texture only shows up over top of the shirt. So we're going to use the pen tool to create an accurate selection around the shirt, and then we can load that as a layer mask. So first use the pen tool, turn it into a selection, load it as a layer mask, and the pattern's only going to be visible where the shirt is. So jumping back into Photoshop, now we want to use the pen tool to create a selection right around my subject shirt. So let's go ahead and zoom in a couple times. Now, with the pen tool, basically you want to click and drag in the direction that you want your pen path to go. So in this case, I'm going to click and drag in this direction. There we go. We're going to click and drag there and basically just follow the outline of the shirt. So making small points and clicking and dragging in the direction that you want to cover. All right, in this case, we're not going to include the collar. Yeah, we're not going to include the back collar. We'll include the front collar in our selection. So clicking and dragging right along there. All right, and this is going to define the visible area of our shirt. Now, if you guys haven't used the pen tool very much, no big deal. We do have some great free episodes on how to use the pen tool. So you can go to Phlearn.com and just enter into your search bar, pen tool, and we've got some great episodes on just how to use the pen tool. All right, here we go. Let's go ahead and pull this right around there. And remember, all we're doing here is we're going to be making a selection out of this pen path, and that's going to define where our pattern is actually going to be visible. So this is a very precise way of doing it. If you wanted to just simply grab your brush tool and do like a very rough edge, that's totally okay too. I just want to make sure I show you guys the most precise way of doing it, but if you have like if you're doing it for like a mock-up purposes or something like that, you can do it a lot quicker simply by just grabbing the brush tool, but it won't be as accurate as this. Keep that in mind. All right, cool. We're going to go back down around here. All right, so you can see basically we're just clicking around, clicking and dragging from one area to another. And if you need to move any of your control points at any time, just hold down the Control or the Command key and click on any of your points. There we go. Let's say we want to move this key here. Hold down Control or Command, click here, and then you can move it around. There we go, making it much easier to make an accurate selection. Okay, right up around there. Go ahead and point it down. All right, this is probably the hardest part of the entire tutorial here, just making a pen selection right around our subject. But if you guys do want to be able to create accurate selections in Photoshop, the pen tool really is the best tool for the job. All right, here we're going to go right around our fingers. There we go. All right, right up here. All right, and we're almost done, guys. All right. Watching someone use the pen tool has got to be very exciting. I'm watching myself doing it right now and I'm getting bored, but it really is the best way to make an accurate selection. There we go. And come right back around there. Let's go ahead and finish it off. All right, we'll go back to our original point and click right there. So there we have it. We have a pen path right around our shirt. Now, in this case, we made this a very accurate selection. I wanted to show you guys the best way to do it. But again, if you just want to do this a little bit quicker, you could grab your brush tool, simply paint white over the area you want it to be visible. So in this case, we use the pen tool, but you can use whatever tool you find necessary. Okay guys, now that our pen selection is active, we're going to go ahead and right click here with our pen tool, and I'm going to go down to Make Selection. It's just going to make a selection around the edge of our piece of clothing. Now we're going to feather the radius by 0.5 pixels. It's just going to give the edge a little bit more of a realistic edge. We don't want it to be too sharp. So 0.5 pixels is perfect. Let's go ahead and hit OK. There we go. Now you can see we've got this as a selection. And now as a selection, I can click here on my layer mask. I'm going to hold Shift and hit Delete, and we're going to bring it to white. So Shift Delete is our fill dialog. We're going to fill this with white on our layer mask. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. Command D to deselect. And there you can see the pattern is visible exactly where our original shirt is. So this is great. Now we have the pattern defined where the shirt is visible. Next step is to go ahead and use the Liquify tool to transform it and make it look like it's actually a part of the original piece of clothing. So to transform our fabric, we're going to go to Filter and down to Liquify. Okay, now the Liquify filter is a very powerful filter here within Photoshop. You have a ton of different options. Now in this case, we're going to be starting off with our forward warp tool, which basically just allows you to push and pull your pixels around. Okay, and this is how we're going to transform our fabric. Now here on the right, we want a couple of options. We want first, make sure we have Show Image. We want to make sure we have that checked. Okay, we want to make sure we have Show Background checked as well. If you don't have that checked, then you can't see what you're doing and it's not that helpful. So let's go ahead and hit the Show Background, Backdrop. There we go. Now we want to use, as our backdrop, we want to use our background layer. So where it says Use All Layers, let's go ahead and go down to Background. Okay, and we can zoom in here by hitting Command+. And here we can see as I transform my fabric, now you can get an accurate preview of what it's actually going to look like on your background. Now you have a couple of options here. You can have your background be in front, or behind, or blend. In this case, I think behind is the best option because we have our fabric and our background is actually behind it. And we can adjust our opacity here as well. All right, so let's go ahead and bring it a little bit lower. I want to be able to see what I'm doing here, and we're going to be sculpting this fabric around our shirt. Okay, now we're going to start off with the forward warp tool. So let's go ahead and zoom out. We want to make our tool a little bit larger here. There we go. We can bring our size up just like this. Okay, and then we're going to start clicking from the outside and dragging in. So in this case, click from the outside and drag in. There we go. Because we kind of want to get this piece of fabric, there we go, to look like it's actually wrapping around our clothing. There we go. And as I go from the outside and push in, you can see in this case it actually does look like it's starting to wrap around. Because the fabric, you can see it's getting like scrunched up towards the edges, and that's exactly what we want. We want it to make it look like it's, you know, actually curving around our subject. All right, now in this case we can go ahead and push some of this fabric up in this case because we want it to like follow the curvature of the actual fabric. And we can come down here and start pulling this down a little bit. So let's go ahead and pull this up. There we go. Now, if you want to bring your pressure down a little bit, it's going to go ahead and apply less of an effect. So you can be a little bit more subtle with less pressure, or you can have a stronger effect with more pressure. All right, so let's go ahead and bring this in here, right to the edge. All right, I'm not too worried about her fingers in this case because we're using our layer mask to make that invisible. Now, in this case, we have some fabric. I actually want to pull this area out and make it look like, there we go, make it look like the fabric is wrapping around that little wrinkle there. And we're going to go over how to do wrinkles in just a minute because that's a really important part of this. All right, let's go ahead and stretch out our fabric just a little bit more. I want to make sure we include our sleeve coverage there. There we are. Cool. Now, in this case, guys, this is obviously not going to be the exact same thing as if a shirt actually did have this pattern on it. We get asked quite a bit, how do I create patterns and textures on clothing? And as far as I'm concerned, this is the best way to approximate it in Photoshop. But if you want something to be like 100% real, that's, you know, that's the time for a photograph. You can do a really nice job approximating here, but it's really difficult to take into account every single piece of wrinkle and clothing and stretch and pull that fabric actually has. So if you need it to look 100% real, then I would say in that case, do your best to actually make that piece of clothing and photograph it. But for like visualization purposes and things like that, I think this is definitely a really good alternative here. All right. That looks great. Now, in this case, we got a couple more special things that I want to show you guys how to do. So in this case, we have there we go. We have this wrinkle here. Let me show you guys here. This wrinkle that runs right up there, right? And we want the fabric to look like it's actually folded over that wrinkle as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my freeze mask tool. Clicking on our freeze mask tool, we're basically able to paint an area on our photo, there we go, that is not going to be affected by, there we go, by our Liquify tool, which is really cool. So we're going to click on the freeze mask eraser right under that because I just painted a little bit too much right over here. There we go. So with our freeze mask, basically made that selection there. Let's go ahead and fill in some areas right underneath it. With that selection active, now if I go to my forward warp tool and I start moving things around, you can see that does not get moved. Okay, which is really great for creating wrinkles and things like that. So let's go ahead and start pulling our fabric down here under this area. There we go. And what it's going to do is it's going to make it look like the fabric is actually pulling under and then the wrinkle kind of like goes back over again. Okay, giving it the illusion of a little bit more three-dimensional space. All right, let's go ahead and click on our erase freeze mask tool and see how that looks. All right, pretty cool, huh? So you can see the fabric actually looks like, because it's not continuous from this area to this area, it actually looks like it's gone under a transformation there, which is, I think, really, really cool. All right, so now we're going to use the forward warp tool. We're going to get a little bit more refined here. Here we go. Let's click on our forward warp tool and start pulling some areas down. If you do have like wrinkles and creases and things like that, you can grab your forward warp tool and pull down in this area, and then I'm going to pull up in that area. Okay, And that's going to make it look like the shirt is actually following those wrinkles and creases in your shirt. There we go. And let's go ahead and zoom down there. Let's bring this up just a little bit. All right, and then we're going to push this out just a little bit more. All right, there we go. Okay, that looks great. Well, we're going to push this in. We've got a little bit more I want to do here with this wrinkle on the top. There we go. So the idea here is when you find a wrinkle here or a fold in fabric, simply choose one side of it and pull down just like that, and the other side of it and pull up. There we go. It's going to look like it's actually curving right around that fold. There we go. All right. So that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit OK, and it's going to apply our transformation. There we go. And now we can see our transformation is applied. Okay, we've got our layer mask in place. So we've got our transformation and our fabric is only visible exactly where we want it to be. Now we're going to work with a couple blending modes and some blending options to make it actually blend in to the original shirt. So our fabric is in place, but it doesn't look realistic because we don't have any highlights and shadows where our fabric should be. So the first thing we're going to do is change our blending mode of this layer. We're going to go from normal down to multiply. There we go. And you can see instantly it's going to basically darken whatever it touches, but it's also going to keep into account the wrinkles from the underlying layer. So again, going from normal, we can see we don't have any of the detail of the shirt. Here we're going to go down to multiply, and now we can actually see some of the detail from the original. Now in this case, I'm going to lower our opacity just a little bit as well, so we get some more of the original shirt showing through. About 90% is going to look good here. Now I actually want to copy some of the shadows and highlights from my original shirt, because we've got this original shirt here. If I can copy some of my shadows and highlights and put that over top of my fabric, then we're going to really start looking real. Okay, so to do so, let's go ahead and click on our background. We're going to click and drag it down to the new layer icon to create a background copy, and we're going to bring this all the way up to the very top. Okay, now in this case, what we're going to do is change our blending mode on this layer from normal down to multiply as well. Okay, so we can see here the shadows are showing up now on top of our shirt. But in this case, our shadows are showing up everywhere. I really only want these to be visible where my shirt is. So we're going to use a clipping mask. Let's go ahead and right click here on our background copy and go down to create a clipping mask. There we go. And what a clipping mask does is it makes this layer only visible where the underlying layer is visible. Okay, so in this case, this layer is only visible where our shirt layer is, and there we go. We can see we've got a little bit more of a shadow on top of our shirt. Very cool. Now, in this case, I can lower the opacity of it, and that changes how visible my shadow is. If you want even more of a shadow, you could just duplicate this layer. All right, cool. So we've got our shadow looking great. Now we're going to go ahead and add a highlight from the existing shirt also. So to add the highlight, we're going to click on our background layer, go ahead and duplicate that and bring it all the way up here to the top. There we go. And I want to make sure to clip this to my shirt as well. So we're going to right click here and go down to create a clipping mask, same like we did earlier. Now in this case, we have this layer is set to multiply for our shadows. Now the opposite of multiply is screen. So we're going to change our blend mode from normal down to screen, and now we can see we've got highlights on my original shirt, which looks great. But in this case, you can see there's definitely some of our pattern visible, but when we turn this into screen, it hid a lot of our image, and that's because the shirt is so light in color. So what we're going to do is darken the shirt down on this layer, and then the screen effect is not going to be as powerful. Okay. So to darken that down, we're going to hit Control or Command L for our levels. Now here in the levels, you have control over your shadows, there we go, your midtones, just like that, and your highlights. So if I want to make this darker, we're going to take our shadows and drag this from the left to the right. There we go. And you're going to see right about there, it's going to start to disappear from the darker areas, and we're only going to have it be visible on our highlights. So the idea here is we're using a screen blending mode to make this visible where the highlights are, okay? But then we're just darkening it down a little bit. So we're going to go right to about right there. Okay, let's hit OK. And then turning this off and on here, we can go ahead and change our opacity just a little bit if we want to do that as well. So it just gives a little bit more character to the piece of clothing. Now again, it's not absolutely perfect, but I think it looks pretty dang good. So let's go back to our original. Let's change this from a multiply back to our normal here. So this is what we look like just with a layer mask and a transformation. So to get this in place, again, we changed it to a multiply layer, brought down our opacity just a little bit. Then we brought in our shadows here from our original image, set to multiply. And then we brought in our highlights, set to screen. And there we go. We have our pattern of our original image here on our subject, which I think looks pretty awesome. Not to mention the original pattern was completely opposite as well, so we inverted it. All right, guys, and that's all there is to transferring a pattern or a texture onto a piece of clothing in Photoshop. If you want to do the same thing, just follow these key steps. To start off, go ahead and choose a pattern that you like. Click and drag it onto the image of your subject, and go ahead and transform it into place. Now, you want to make sure that the pattern is a little bit larger than the area of clothing you want to apply it to. So in this case, we scaled it a little bit larger. If you want a smaller texture, just go ahead and repeat that pattern over and over again. Once you have your pattern in place, it's time to cut out the exact shape of your original piece of clothing. In this case, we use the pen tool, which is by far the most accurate tool for cutting it out. Basically, just click and drag around the piece of clothing. When you're done, go ahead and right-click, go down to Make a Selection, and then load that as a layer mask for your piece of fabric. Next, it's time to use the Liquify tool to transform that fabric and make it look like it's a part of the original piece of clothing. We're going to be using the forward warp tool to push and pull those pixels around. Now, in this case, I recommend having Show Backdrop checked. We're going to choose our layer as our background and have it be behind, and then use our opacity slider so we can see our fabric that we're actually manipulating and the background texture. In this example, we show you how to work with folds of fabric as well. Go ahead and grab your freeze mask and paint it over one half of the fold. Then use the forward warp tool to bring the texture underneath that fold. It's going to make it look like there's an actual break in the pattern, making it look like the pattern rolls around the piece of clothing. Once you're done liquefying and transforming the fabric, it's time to blend it into the original piece of clothing. In this case, we change our layer blend mode from normal down to multiply and lower the opacity a little bit. Then we wanted additional shadows and highlights on our fabric, so we duplicated our background layer twice. We set one layer to multiply and one layer to screen, and we used a levels adjustment layer to adjust the darkness of the screen layer, making it only show up where the highlights are visible on our image. And that's it, guys, how to add a pattern or texture to any piece of clothing in Photoshop. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and watching today's episode. If you love Photoshop as much as I do, go ahead and click on your screen right about now. We'll send you free Photoshop and photography episodes every single week. And if you have an idea for an episode or a question about today's episode, simply leave it in a comment right down below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much, guys. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone. All right, cool. Let us do this. This episode is going to be great for... So starting off in Photoshop, we've got our subject. All right, cool. All right, so to add a